I'm here.
Okay, so we should, I think we're going to start. I'm Nick Dawson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Talk House Soul. This is the first in a series of Q&As we're running as part of Talk House's Fall Film Festival in collaboration with Kino Marquee. And the four films in the festival are Eliza Hittman's It Felt Like Love, Charles Lane's Sidewalk Stories, So Young Kim's In Between Days, and Todd Haynes' Poison. And I'm very excited that tonight we're going to have in conversation Tom Kalin, the director of Swoon and Savage Grace, with Eliza Hittman, director of It Felt Like Love and Beach Rats. And Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always now, it's now available to stream everywhere, right? I mean, I presume all of yours are in some place or other, as yours are, Tom, I hope, because people should just go get them. People should just go widely and acquire and enjoy all of the five films I just mentioned. But you know, I should preface this conversation just before I let you guys just have free reign that Tom's power got cut and his Wi-Fi is out, so he is using a satellite. I'll let you explain, but you're using your satellite connection, which I think is slightly sort of 2005 era internet, or maybe even slightly older than that. So we're gonna prevail despite minor technical challenges. But I think,
yes,
you know, and also just I'm before I shut up completely, I've just posted the link to the Talk House Fall Film Festival series. A series pass is an absolute steal. It allows you, I think it's $20. It allows you to watch all four films. And, you know, I think individually they're $8, but for all four, it's 20. And they're all just all really amazing, essential films that you should definitely be watching anyway. So yeah, I will let Eliza and Tom kind of take it from here. Two genuine pros, and you know, this is really nice to have you guys doing this. So thank you. I'm going to mute myself right now.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
I'm going to acknowledge that what Nick is telling you is true, that I have a satellite connection. And so I have also what's called an unstable connection. So I may be out of sync the entire time and freeze up, but hopefully the audio will remain good. And you know, imagine me being sort of a silent film at 12 frames a second or something like that. So, hi, Eliza. I think the last time I saw you was over a most delicious meal in person. The last time I saw you was over a delicious meal in Brooklyn. Is that true?
I think so. One that hopefully somewhere down the road, maybe in the spring, we can do again. And how are you faring during all of this?
I'm faring well, because I think, you know, most of us, people who write and create things, are used to being alone, confronting our innermost demons and conflicts. So this seems like a familiar space. There definitely have been moments of being paralyzed and finding it hard to work. But mostly lately it's been good. I feel productive and in sync with the moment we're in. They remind me, this time reminds me of the 70s. I came of age during the time of Jim Jones, you know, getting the people in the People's Temple to commit suicide, with, you know, with the nightly headlines were just like, you know, crazy Baroque theater. So yeah, these times seem familiar, sadly. And you, how are you faring?
I'm doing as well as I can do. Obviously, I have a lot of work on my plate, and that keeps me sane. Hold on one moment.
We're getting a great cameo from Jonas, Eliza's son. We're having what's commonly known as an off-screen cinema moment.
Rooms. We have to have a change of scenery. One moment.
This is the joy of live Q&As. And I posted this in the chat, but also we're going to probably talk until about 8:35 or so. If people have questions, they can just post them for Eliza or for Tom. You can post them using the Q&A function, and I will relay them to Eliza and Tom, and we can sort of do that right at the end if we have questions.
It was like a cinematic gesture. That was like a beautiful Hittman-esque cinematic gesture to kick us off. We had a big trucking shot that took us from one strong, beautiful medium close-up to another. It was amazing. Okay, so listen, everybody is talking about that New York is dead, which is just so depressing to hear that. I moved to New York in the mid-'80s in the midst of the AIDS crisis, another pandemic, the second pandemic. And I cannot think of a filmmaker who has more affection for New York City, or, I mean, I know that you grew up in Flatbush, and when I think of It Felt Like Love, it really brings to life Gravesend in a way, for me, honestly, was kind of a revelation. I knew a little bit about Gravesend in proximity to Coney Island. So I just wondered if you would talk about the vitality of the city in your work and the inspiration it serves, and the multifaceted way the city is a character in your movie.
Yeah, I guess, I grew up watching a certain kind of New York film, that did, stories that emerged from different neighborhoods and that were so specific and relatable, like films like The Little Fugitive, about two brothers in Brooklyn, and one who thinks he's accidentally killed his brother and spends the whole day at Coney Island, wandering around with guilt and grief. And films like Saturday Night Fever and Taxi Driver, and they all felt very embedded in a movie called The Lords of Flatbush, which I remembered my father showed me as a kid.
Oh my God, totally.
Yeah, I grew up thinking about New York, and looking to film to sort of talk about these very specific areas. And that was something that I felt was lost, in watching films as an adult. And I felt like we were only seeing one experience represented on screen. And I was inspired when I made the film, by mumblecore filmmakers who were tackling this one very specific narrative about post-college in New York. And I was inspired and repelled by those stories in a way. And it made me want to revisit my youth and these forgotten neighborhoods, that not that many people think of as, being specific or unique or exotic in any way. So that was sort of the motivation, I guess, was to sort of go back to telling a very kind of localized New York story.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting because, you just mentioned all these other movies when you talked about what you were thinking about and what excited you as a filmmaker. But I also always find it striking because a bunch of times when you've talked about your own work, you've said that you actually don't find it useful to look at other movies to prepare your films. And that it's striking to me that, your background was in theater, but your first film has not a trace of, traditional theatricality about it. You understood what was cinematic. You understood that the camera was a participant, that the camera was a narrator, that the camera made us be able to have a proximity to your protagonist, Lila, in a way that was very different than theater. So I just wondered if you talk about that, because I find it interesting. A lot of filmmakers think the way you make a film is to look at a lot of other filmmakers and knit them together. And although I can myself pick out films that this film might recall, the more I see your filmmaking, the more I feel like there's a very specific language you're forming, or approach that you're developing that's really specific to your methods and to your own experience.
I guess I try not to watch too much, just because it'll ultimately make me feel like a failure, to watch these movies that I respect, and that I feel ultimately I'll never make anything as good as that. And I'm nervous to try and accidentally be trying to replicate things that I see. I have a puppy here who's also making noise. Everybody's bothering me tonight. It's not usually this chaotic. There's a little puppy over here. Anyway, I guess, I try to think about like how do I prepare a film? How do I, shot list a film? What kind of visual language do I want to use? And I think, that theater doesn't explore time and space in the way that cinema can. And I found myself, like, when I was like thinking about how to prepare a film, like I would just walk through the story as the main character. And from there, I began to think about how to immerse the audience in their subjective points of view. And I think that's like sort of one of the most critical decisions you make as a director, has to do with whether something's objective or subjective. And I guess I was always trying to push the boundaries on like what that kind of immersive subjectivity could look and feel like, if that makes sense. And the film is very much about a character who feels undesirable. And I was thinking very much about who she desires, and, how the film couldn't sexualize her, because that's not the story I'm telling. The lens, the gaze, like, couldn't sexualize her, but it is about her erotic gaze on men, and looking at men in the same segmented sort of pornographic way that like we're trained to sort of look at women. And those were sort of all like kind of visual ideas and things that I was thinking about in terms of like how the film was conceived of.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so interesting. Well, you have this incredible performance by Gina Persanti, who plays Lila, the lead character. And there's such a memorable opening to your movie of the way you're using close-ups, and you're using her long lens point of view shots that are filled with kind of like, they're full of covetousness. They're full of desire, but they're full of more than desire. They're full of like admiration and jealousy.
Mm-hmm.
They're full of two opposite things.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what makes it seem lifelike. It's not just the lusting, eroticizing gaze of the male body. It's seeing Kiara, her friend, in relationship to it. And sort of like, or, at this point, she says things in dialogue where she pretends to know things about oral sex or all kinds of experience that we know instantly she doesn't know anything about.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a way, I think, you've talked about directing Gina, who was quite young and, really did not particularly want to play an unattractive young woman who was not desirable, because I can imagine at that age you're very exposed. And in another filmmaker's hands, that would have felt very different. And what is interesting in your film is that like this line between admiration and envy, or admiration and jealousy, or this kind of implication of opposites, you as a director almost feel like there's a pact with the lead character. Like she has to, because you're asking her to experience a certain kind of shame or unattractiveness, but it's not through lack of empathy that you're asking her to have that experience on screen, which is why, I don't know, it seems so lifelike, because it seems lived. It's a very rambling question, I guess, but And also because I think your film is often read as just simple autobiography, which I don't read it as at all. So I just wondered if you'd comment about that very complex relationship you have with Gina in making the film, how you used all the different tools you used to shape that performance.
Mm-hmm. I think, you know, it's hard to remember like sort of everything that we did to prepare for the movie. And she did have a lot of ambivalence about, you know, doing things that the character did, and, you know, and going out of her comfort zone. And, you know, some of things she didn't understand that we could stage safely, where she wouldn't actually have to be in the scene in a way that would make her as the actor uncomfortable. And I think that's an important part of directing for me, is like not wanting to legitimately make an actor do, you know, be or feel uncomfortable for the sake of a performance. And, you know, we were conscious of that, and extremely conscious of that, even though, you know, because she was 14 and it wasn't SAG and we didn't have parents hanging around and guarding the set. There was a sense of freedom and trust. And I just, you know from other experiences now, you know, that that's rare. To be able to have an actor and her parent who trust you and just embrace the process and the sort of scope of the process and go with it. A lot of her questions and the conversations that we had about the character, we had before she agreed to do the film, because she had so much anxiety about the role that we spent a lot of time in coffee shops, like going through a script that she had filled with Post-it notes. And in a way, through working through her anxiety about doing the movie, she was also working through the character. And we did a lot of table work before she said yes. And then when she said yes, she was really all in and brought, you know, this sort of sincerity and, I don't know, credibility to it, you know, almost instantly. And, you know, I think part of what's fun about working with young people is that they understand that acting is doing, and they dive in. And they're, you know, once she was on board, you know, and she went with, you know, what she was feeling and the flow and the energy of the production and the shoot, you know, and there, all of that table work and questions and, you know, conversations about the character and why she was doing what she was doing, you know, was sort of over in a way, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah, you have such a gift, I think, for casting actors and understanding that the core thing of filmmaking is about photographing thought. That we watch people and we see them have an internal emotional life or an internal intellectual life, whatever it is. And that's so we're, you know, or that you're also looking for someone who's just able to be in the present tense, or somebody who's a instinctive performer. You know, I remember you saying Kiara was a dancer, actually. And so she had a kind of physical self-consciousness and ability to just walk across a room that showed a kind of intention that was very specific. You know, you've had a remarkable 7 years since this movie, or 8 years since this movie. Is it true? 7?
13, 7.
7. So, you know, you've made 3 movies in 7 years, which, you know, not one of them is even mildly weak. They're all amazing, expanding the envelope, deepening your craft, award-winning at ever bigger venues. And, you know, I was only sad to see this year that COVID got in the way of your mighty release of your new film.
I don't know if it,
but I wondered if you had an opinion. I don't know. I mean, I just, the whole world seems so out of whack. Who can weigh anything? But I wondered, there's been a lot of discussion about your film in terms of kind of the techniques of how you make it, and for lack of a better word, what's sometimes called neo-realism. That's like the least thing I think of your film. When I think of, just talk for a second, I know we're supposed to talk about It Felt Like Love, but just for a moment to talk about Beach Rats, which also has a very consuming gaze,
Mm-hmm.
a very eroticizing gaze. And it's not just achieved through the lens you use, it's actually achieved through the way it's lit. And a funny discovery on my part was discovering that you really love the work of Barbara Crane, who's a photographer that I studied with in Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
and who influenced the way you lit the shots, that the images have their own source light, which is the opposite of documentary, opposite of naturalism.
Mm-hmm.
So, and to me, what makes your filmmaking quite unique is that you use, your bullshit detectors turn very high. You use your instincts for truthfulness to find very solid pieces of behavior or to stage things in ways that have very rich nuance. But you're also bringing it in terms of the image, always. So the movies to me seem quite heightened. They don't seem naturalistic, they seem expressionistic. And I wondered if you had an opinion about that, what I'm saying there.
No, I agree, and I appreciate, obviously, your observations. I think that, it felt like love was always meant to feel like a memory in some ways. That this is, something that we could all sort of like confront and understand, almost as this small shameful experience in a character's life that maybe we have our own to connect to it. And yeah, I was never trying, with beach rats to make something that was explicitly, erotic, and there's a tension, obviously, that has to do with the male body and that, the sort of toxic nature of it as well, and trying to sort of find a way to have those ideas live in the same frame, and was never trying to achieve a certain kind of realism. And I use things, that I also think are really antithetical to sort of like documentary verite, like sometimes too much slow motion. And, I am trying to achieve something that's, sort of dreamy and real at the same time, if that makes sense. And I don't adhere to, rigid conventions the way that we think about them of like verite. And it's funny to hear that with Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, because there's only really 2 handheld shots in the film. And, things that you associate with a certain kind of, documentary realism. But I think maybe in a fundamental sense, the idea that those characters in these neorealist films are pushing up against these sort of oppressive structural barriers, from a character point of view, maybe that makes sense. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I think it's a really good question that we're trying to figure out. I think we're in the middle of figuring it out in everything that we make right now, is what I think. I wonder what you think about how your film lives in the world. We've had, well, I mean, Harvey Weinstein was not in jail when you made your movie, right? A whole sea change has happened around a number of issues in our culture, from issues of sort of, the so-called Me Too moment, and then other moments around, obviously Black Lives Matter, that's really kind of powerfully gravitated around and has shaped the discussion in the country in such a huge way. And there's also then been a bigger discussion about who is making films, who's represented, who's in the films, who makes them. Obviously, the Academy's new guidelines this year. And I wonder just what your movie looks like. I know from my own experience what your own first feature, and because you had a very much lauded first feature, so it's hard to kind of sometimes remember the film on its own terms almost, because all the other experiences that you have accumulate along the way. And I just wonder what it looks like, what it feels like to look back at the moment of making the film, and in relationship now to the moment we're living in, and also your own experiences.
I think it's a tough question to answer. You know, I think obviously, you know, I think, you know, it's a moment of reckoning over like who has been able to make work and why. And, you know, I think that, you know, and hopefully, you know, when there's more production happening, like, you know, the way that we think about, you know, what work has value changes. You know, I don't know if I've ever, you know, felt like people think my work has a certain kind of value, you know, monetary value, market value, any of the films. And, you know, that's propelled me to make work that I feel is useful in some way, and to not worry about the expectations of the market and of the industry. But I hope that like the definition of what has value and what is marketable begins to change and is less, you know, less informed by like whiteness and maleness and all of those elements, if that makes sense.
Totally.
It's a tricky one, and
Because both,
I think for
both
me,
would be satisfying.
yeah, I think for me, what was nice about Never Rarely, you know, and having this film in my life, you know, at this moment where like during the pandemic, you know, they deemed abortion non-essential care, you know, and we have a president who's trying to, you know, stack the Supreme Court with conservative justices. It's like, you know, the film, like, I think, you know, I truly feel I got to make something, you know, that in the beginning of the journey, nobody thought was relevant. You know, and when I would go out pitching that movie, people would say, you know, people who were interested in social issue films would say, we're looking for something more global. And I'd say, what's more global than like a woman having the right to the autonomy of her own body? And, you know, I think that like, you know, in the 7 years or so that I've been thinking about that movie, you know, its relevancy and its urgency, you know, has all become more clear. And it feels like this sort of, I don't know, this sort of merging of a creative project and a, you know, a sort of political project that I wanted to make for a long time that nobody saw had value in the beginning. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't know,
It
a
does.
long
I think it's
journey.
very rare. I think in my own experience, it's very rare that you have any sense of having agency or impact in the moment when you make something. Very rare. You know, occasionally things align and you see, oh, I've made something and people are reacting to it. And mostly we're reminded by this career of our, you know, financial insufficiency and how hard it is to finance things and what a disappointment we are to distributors and everyone else. But, you know, I think that the longer I do this thing, the more I have some perspective about it. And, you know, I mean, as a teacher, it's exciting to me that the very fact of the existence of the films you make gives to a generation younger than you agency in their own work. And they see in your films and are inspired by your films in a way that you yourself are inspired by someone else, you know, other filmmakers older than you. And that the number of films and the range of films made just in the last decade has been pretty thrilling. So that, you know, that like there's that, which, you know, and that sure, I think that capitalism always has to catch up. And that I agree, like we're not going to be totally there until the marketplace responds to the work, because that's what's declared important in our culture is the things that people pay for. I want to just ask a couple more questions because I know we want to open up for Q&A, but just to have you talk a little bit more about the rest of the cast and sort of how you found, we talked a little bit obviously about the characters of Lila and Kiara, but maybe the boys, a little bit how you cast them and what you found to be the you know, what you learned about working with these actors of different experience and different ages, and how that unfolded.
Mhm. I think, I mean, if I'm thinking back, like, I tend to like write on my feet, you know, and I had this idea for this character and this, you know, film, and I had a sense that it was, you know, a story about like this sort of self-destructive quest for intimacy. And as I started casting, like I thought about like friends and where friends were from. And I went to a dance studio in Carroll Gardens and I asked to sit in and observe a class. And I responded to the performance that they did for me. And then I thought, well, I wonder if I could write them into the film. And then I asked if they would be in the film. And that's how I found Giovanna Salameni, who plays Chiara, the friend who is in it. And then Ronan Rubinstein, who plays the kind of object, you know, that she's interested in, this young guy who has this reputation. I found him through a manager in, not very exciting, in New Jersey, a manager who was known for kind of breaking young talent. And then the guys I met in a park in a neighborhood called Manhattan Beach. And they were just on a handball court, and I sort of asked if I could photograph them, and they like really, you know, were intrigued by being photographed by me. And we got to talking and I invited them to audition to the film. And I don't know, like, I guess I'd always kind of made work that way. Even when I made short films, I had sort of poked around the areas where I was interested in filming to see who was around, and invited them to consider being in the film. And they brought a level of sort of danger and authenticity, you know, to the film that I couldn't find in casting sessions that I had been doing through more conventional channels.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a mixture for me. It's always a mixture of non-traditional casting and traditional casting. And I don't usually know who will end up coming from what channel. You know, it's a little bit unpredictable. And like, while a certain kind of authenticity is important to me, it's also about emotional authenticity as much as it's about, you know, the specificity of the place. You know, and I think that like with Beach Rats, I threw everybody for a curveball because I ended up casting this kid from London, and the reality is that he brought the most emotional authenticity to the role, and that it didn't matter that he wasn't from that place. And I think I drive everybody a little bit crazy in the casting process, because sometimes I have an idea about what I think will work, and then I discover that it's not what I'm looking for, and I'll change course. But for me, it's about who feels truthful and authentic to me, you know, and it's not necessarily about the place.
Totally. No, I always feel the same way. Like, if the protagonist in my movie has to be in love with the character at some level, I then have to understand that. I have to have some connection to that feeling. I just wonder, I'll ask you another question and then we can see if there's questions in the chat to answer. One filmmaker people sometimes compare your work to is Katrine Breillat, which for me always seems off a little bit, because Katrine Breillat's work, although I love it and think it's amazing, kind of, I don't know, she's like drawn a conclusion about sex in a way, or she knows what she thinks about it already in some ways when she's showing it. So it's not that they're not such ambivalent discoveries. And what I found in your film that I found interesting, that often sexual desire or sexuality is positioned as just one of another behaviors. Like, I don't watch your films and think, oh, here's the sex scene. And And I just from my own experience, and I wonder what you think of that, because from my own experience, that was really important when I was making Savage Grace, for me as a director, to realize that the sex scenes actually just showed another way that these characters communicated behaviorologically. And because they were so taboo, or we were so trained to, you know, fetishize them or make them a titillating experience, we brought to them different expectations or a different grammar or whatever. But yeah, anyways, you know, that a sex scene could be a scene that also gave you contradictory character information, or, you know, that they were sources of all kinds of other story meaning just than a sex scene. And I wondered if you talk about that in this film and your work overall.
Yeah, I think that I'm somebody who explores gray areas, you know, and I think that like the films, I think that they always do that in those moments, you know, that they're never on the extreme of being bad and violent, and they're never, you know, the extreme of being sort of pleasurable, you know, and they're always about this sort of this complex kind of gray area where, you know, there are other things, you know, that are preventing it from being, you know, completely one or the other, if that makes sense. And I think, you know, someone like Catherine Breillat goes to the extremes. You know, if you look at a film like A Real Young Girl, you know, I love that movie. And it's all about, you know, a young woman enjoying and experiencing her sexual fantasies. You know, if you look at a film like, you know, For My Sister, you know, it's, you know, there's, you know, a real rape scene in that film, you know, that is excruciating to watch in a long take, you know, and I don't think I've ever been in either of those spaces, if that makes sense.
No,
They're,
yeah,
they're
it's
all,
exactly the thing you were saying, just about.
yeah, they're all kind of an exploration of sort of like power in a way. And yeah, I don't know.
It's also that's what it implicates the audience, because we see our own flawed humanity or recognize the flawed humanity of the character, and it makes it relatable. I don't know, because you see just because of the gray, because of the mix of motivations and things. I'm gonna try to be a good moderator and pause for a minute at 6:04, almost 6:40, I mean 8:40, and check with Nick to see if there's any questions that have come in from the chat, and also to encourage our listener participants to bring any questions that you might have.
Yes, thank you, Tom. You are the perfect moderator. I appreciate that. Yeah, we have a couple questions in already, and definitely do post more if you have them. First question we have is, this is for both of you, will the cinema experience change in a post-COVID world? I'll let you, I don't know, whichever one of you feels most compelled to answer that first should take it.
I don't know. What do you think, Tom?
Well, I mean, it already has changed for me in terms of my own work, because I tried for a while to get all the money together to make a feature I didn't make, but instead I directed an episode of television for FX. I directed the first episode of a limited series called Pride, which is about LGBTQ civil rights in the US. And it's a doc that has some scripted material. So I shot 2 days of scripted material. It's hour length. And it was strikingly different than making an independent movie. You know, in order to get hired for the job, it was literally just a single pitch by phone. Immediately after that, a contract was executed, and we were making the thing, basically. Money happened as needed. And although there were some struggles, it was nothing comparable to the struggles and difficulties that are required to get a good independent film on screen. So that seems striking. And also, maybe I was lucky, but FX has been very permissive and very creative, like let me do quite bold things creatively. I didn't feel at all hemmed in or censored. So that was my most recent experience. I don't know what it means. I find COVID will
when
make
will it be out?
Say again.
When will the FX show be out for us to watch?
May 2021. It was supposed to happen this year, but it got frozen in COVID land. So we're just now doing the, wrapping up post. But the air date is May 2021. And it's amazing. It's 6 different directors, each one doing a decade. I do the 1950s, and it's each decade moving forward. I think that COVID is going to make it very hard to have production, because people are doing production right now in TV and bigger movies, but people are being tested or separated in different overlapping, circles, and all of that costs a ton of money. If you had a $2 million or $1 million indie movie, you'd probably, I don't know, not double, but 1.5 at least times as much to produce in the time of COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, it's hard to know. I mean, we just said goodbye to Regal Cinemas. And it's the beginning. I don't know what will survive. I haven't asked people how things are doing, because it seems like a really, difficult question. I think that, where the future of cinema is linked to the future of democracy in a way, and we will see what happens. I think, I don't know. I mean, I hope that there's still a place to see a film. And I also think we're in the 21st century, and we have to embrace new technologies and new realities.
Joey, isn't it depressing to think the thing, though, I don't know about you, but like I really romanticized and was profoundly shaped by the experience of collectively watching a movie on a darkened screen in a big room. Because it's like all the reasons. It's like the light is bouncing back on your face, or the image is dark and you can't see who's sitting next to you, or there's some wordless, unconscious thing where you're sharing an experience happening right in front of you. And now to think that with bad ventilation system, we're all exhaling deadly little clouds. It's like, I don't know, there's something really just almost too hard to take in about the thought that thing could potentially be life-threatening or so dangerous. That's really, that's just such a shocking part of this year for me, is to realize you can't just go sit down easily in a theater and watch a movie.
So there's one more question we have.
Drive-ins upstate, Tom, you can go to? Are there any drive-ins where you are?
But do they ever play, a Visconti movie at a drive-in? No, I don't know. I mean, what they played at drive-in is fine. What did I see? We actually had a very fun thing last year where we went to Tanglewood, and they did West Side Story with live orchestra accompaniment, where they played the numbers live, and that was a blast. I don't know. And it's not that I watch less movies. I watch 1 million movies, but I watch them on my computer or sometimes projected on the wall of my house, but never on a giant screen. In the last 9 months, I haven't watched anything actually projected. So.
Okay, we have one more question I think we can squeeze in. Somebody's asking Eliza, he says, "Hi Eliza, your movies really make me think and dig deep on things. I've heard you talk about how you find actors, and I wanted to ask how actors can find you and what you're working on next."
I am just in the writing phase of a new feature, and I think that you could drop your headshot and your resume in the chat box, and that would be the best way to reach me. It's a little too early to talk about the projects, because I just have no idea when they'll be made and if they'll be made, and I feel like I jinx them when I put them out into the world, and they don't sound that exciting anyway when I talk about them. But just trying to work on a feature and developing a television show with Amazon. So trying to do something in both spaces in case one no longer exists by the time the pandemic is over.
Exactly.
In case the chat box disappears too quickly, I'm very happy to be the conduit to pass on something to Eliza. So if you want to email me at nick@thetalkhouse.com, you can do that. And I think we're basically out of time, but I wanted to thank you guys so much for doing this. This was really, you know, I count you both as friends, and it's always lovely to be in your company. For everybody here, you can get more of Tom and Eliza both through their films and also through going to Talk House, where you can listen to them talk about Oscar movies from a couple of years ago. This was a time when people could get together in a room and we could record things as humans in the same place. It was a special and seemingly very distant time. Also, I have to flag up the fact that the next one of these will be exactly a week from today, next Wednesday at 8 p.m. It will be Steve Buscemi talking with Charles Lane and his composer, Mark Martyr, about Charles's wonderful movie, Sidewalk Stories, another just really phenomenal debut film. So go sign up for that now. And just, again, thank you so much, Tom and Eliza. It's always just such a pleasure to do anything with you, whether it's having a meal or just listening to you talk. And this was very special. So go watch all of their movies, and hopefully I'll see a bunch of you next week. I'm Nick Dawson. Thank you for watching this, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you. Good night. Bye.
Good night. Bye.